chapter, and we saw in the last shloka the despondency of Arjuna, where he casts away his bow and arrow and he just crashes himself in the battlefield with the distressed mind. From the mid of the first chapter, if you see the sequence of events, Arjuna wanted to uh, Arjuna wanted Lord Krishna to take the chariot in between the battlefield so that he will view the people against whom he wants to fight with. When Lord Krishna takes a chariot and keeps it in the middle of the battlefield and says to see the Kurus who have aligned to fight, a kind of emotional bond triggers within Arjuna at that point of time where he had to be in the state of mediator and see, and that emotional state makes him that minus and inus with all the people over there, and he first starts feeling that emotional bond, after which it converts into a physical form of weakness where he expresses himself the physical symptoms that his legs are shivering, his mouth is drying up, and many more, his body is burning and all. That continues for 3 or 4 shlokas where he tells about his physical. Finally, he concludes that Krishna, whatever we are going to do is not good and it's going to cause us sin. So, from his personal opinion, in the next 10 shlokas, he starts a kind of philosophy, bringing society into picture and telling that the war is going to destroy the society in many ways, in which all the people, the younger ones will lose the parents to guide them, and the women will not have a good kind of people, or the intermingling of castes happen because of all the people dying in the war. This will bring about destruction in society, and the elders or the ancestors will be deprived of getting their pinda pradana or getting their rites done, and that's why the whole thing is going to be a destruction. After the philosophy, at the end, Sanjaya narrates that Eva Muktarjunam Sankhye Ratopasta Upavishat Visrujya Shasharam Chapam Shokasam Vigna Manasaha. So, after speaking, he just sits down in the chariot, casting away his bow and arrow with a distressed mind and sorrow. So, this is the end of the first chapter. And at the end of every chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we have a colophon which is repeated. And that is this. And today, I think half of the time I'm going to spend to explain this colophon. Om Tat Saditi Srimad Bhagavad Gitasu Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Arjuna Vishada Yogo Nama Prathamodhyayah. This colophon is repeated at the end of each and every chapter, and it carries a great significance. And that's why I wanted to explain you in detail, word by word, so that the thing resonates in our mind when we actually explain. I think you must have heard of the word Tat Sat, Om Tat Sat. It is mostly chanted in many of the Hindu ceremonies at many places. And what does this signify? Om Tat Sat indicates that Om is actually the word of creation, which represents the Supreme Lord, and Tat in Sanskrit means that, and Sat means truth. So Om Tat Sat is again a three form of supreme truth that is represented here. And the same thing also goes in the Christianity, where that the meaning of that truth, when you say what is that truth or what is that absolute truth, in the Christianity also they say that Moses, when he went to get the 10 commandments from the God will give him the 10 commandments. And while getting down, Moses will ask the God, whom should I say to the people that gave me? Then the voice of the God replies, tell them that I am that I am. So the same thing is mentioned in many of these scriptures about the truth, about that yamness and about that I-ness. It's a very, very profound thing to understand and realize. That is the significance of the words Om, Tat, Tat. And after that, we get Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So Iti is in this Bhagavad Gita. So means in this book of Bhagavad Gita. And what is Bhagavad Gita? It's a Upanishad. So it falls under the category of Upanishads in our Hindu scriptures. We have Vedas, and under the Vedas, one of the sects of the branch of scriptures is Upanishad. So Iti Bhagavad Gita Su, Upanishadsu. And what is this Bhagavad Gita about? Means it is Brahma Vidya. It says Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishnarjuna Samvade. So it's a Brahma Vidya. Brahma Vidya is a science or knowledge of the absolute. Brahman is the absolute or the completeness. So it is the study of that completeness, and it is also Yoga Shastra. Yoga means to unite, or you can say it in terms of practicals. So it is a kind of practice that we need to do, and it falls under the form of practice. And Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade. Here the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. Externally, it is a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. And how does that conversation help us in our internal lives is, it is a conversation between us and our soul. It is a conversation between our soul and us. That is the realization of the God within us. So it's a Brahma Vidya, which is like in, if you take any subjects, like if you take physics, we get theory, we have practice. And when you talk about matter and all, first we need to understand the theory, after which we do some kind of practicals to understand or apply the theoretical knowledge we gained. And after that, we will have some advanced kind of applications where we apply the practical knowledge with some more things. In the same way, what does Bhagavad Gita teach is not just theory, to just read the theory and get away with it. By understanding the theory, because you need to have the right idea on the truth, the knowledge of absolute or the truth. Once you have the right understanding of what is the truth, you practice it in your daily activities, which will take you ready for realization. So Yoga Shastra is totally the Karma Yoga, which we do in Bhagavad Gita. That is the practice. So once you practice, you will be able to progress further for your self-realization. So it's not just not theory. That's what is the main emphasis. Whatever we see here or whatever we understand here, we need to put it into practice. When you see a red color object, how can you say that a particular object is red in color? How do you identify the red color of that particular object?
When we see, we can see the color is red because we know it's red in color.
How do you know it's red in color? Scientifically think.
Yeah, it was introduced by someone to us saying that it is a red in color, so we follow that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing is, like when we see it's red in to even that red in color, when someone says to make sure also, the basic thing is like when you see, like when a white light reflects on a thing, why an object seems any color is that it absorbs all the light and leaves away only one light. And that's why we see that particular object is in that color. It applies to every object. So it is not an independent perception of redness of the object, that just because that object is red, you cannot identify the red of the object. If the whole world is red in color, can you identify the redness?
No.
If the whole world is red, can you perceive a red color? The absence of red in the other side makes the perception of red for this object at this place. The same thing with our happiness or sadness. If there is no other thing, you cannot perceive. If there is no sadness, you cannot perceive happiness. So it's not an independent perception. So it is dependent on the non-existence of the red color. So at the same time, the distinction that we draw between the redness and the other colors, which is not red, that's what we are drawing. If there was only redness everywhere, we would not be able to perceive the redness of things. It is red and it's not what is not red. That notness is a negative influence exerted to this object. So this is a bit confusing when we see it first. And this is exactly the knowledge of absolute that we get through, because the absolute is something that is beyond our mind's perception, because that cannot be explained. The truth or the absolute thing is not something that we can explain. We can only give a direction on how to go about it to find it out. Everyone has to find it out in their own way, knowing the truth. So if you see a moon in the sky, and if I just point my finger to the moon and say, that is the moon, is my finger touching the moon?
No.
But I show you the direction that the moon is there. So if you travel along the direction I show to you, you will be able to reach the moon. So this is external thing. The same way, when we get the knowledge of Brahma Vidya, or when we understand the theory, most of the theory is in the second chapter, the Sankhya Yoga. When we understand the theory of that absolute, it is to practice it, we have to turn inwards and go deep within to realize the thing. So Brahma Vidya is to be applied in the Yoga Shastra, which is the daily application of a conscious mind or attitude to do anything in the world in terms of lessons that we have learned through Brahma Vidya. What is the purpose of practicing this? You will be able to converse with your soul. They generally say that the God within you is giving you a lot of directions. The soul within you always directs you in the right way. But we are the ones who cannot hear what the internal consciousness or the internal compass is pointing us to, because our mind has been clouded, or the mind, the reflecting medium, which is the mind, is not clear enough. Or we can say, in other words, the frequency of which the soul is speaking with us, and our radio station, and if you consider it as a tower, and the transmitter and the receiver, we are not in tune with the frequencies. That's why we are not able to listen, even though there is a transmission going on from within us. So the practice of this knowledge of Brahma Vidya in our daily applications, which is the yoga, every chapter is that's why it's termed as yoga. When we practice it, we could hear the internal consciousness directions or directing our life. And that practice or that yoga will make your frequency in line with the frequency of your soul, so that you will be able to hear the conversations or the transmissions that are coming from within. So any questions? I know that the Brahma Vidya is a very, very abstract concept. So if you have to understand it better, you need to go through some other books, or wait till the end of the Bhagavad Gita. We will get a little bit of understanding on the Brahma Vidya. But this colophon is very important because it clearly emphasizes that we are here to learn the truth. And that's why the book of Bhagavad Gita is Brahma Vidya, Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre, Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade. And after that, it will tell the name of the chapter. And this is Vishada Yoga. So it says Arjuna Vishada Yogo Nama. Prathamo Dhyayaha is in the first chapter. We are going to practice the Arjuna Vishada Yoga, or we are going to learn how to practice the Arjuna Vishada Yoga. And what is Vishadam? Vishadam is a kind of depression or a state of restlessness in the mind, agitations in the mind. And in exact Sanskrit terms, Vish is considered as an impurity, or it can also be considered as poison, and Ada is bite. So it is a poisonous bite. And here, what are we human beings bitten by? We are bitten by the desires and all our negative tendencies because of our materialistic attachments to this world, which is unreal. So it is a state of sorrow that is arising from our desire and attachment to the sense objects. In real sense, Vishadam is a rogam, meaning Vishadam is a disease which is born out of ignorance. They say we are all deluded from the start because of Maya, the ignorance. And this journey we take for a spiritual upliftment is to remove that ignorance and find the true self. Then how did Vishadam, which is a Rogam, became a Yogam in terms of Bhagavad Gita's first chapter? It became a Yogam because after the second chapter, few verses, we will understand a person who is in that state surrendered to the Supreme Lord for getting the guidance. And such a guidance, after listening to the next chapters or next features of Lord Krishna, Arjuna will raise from the state of Vishadam to the self-realized state. That's why here there is a specific emphasis given to Vishadam as a yogam. Many people ask like, Vishadam is not a yogam, it is a depression, it is a disease, it's a mental illness. How is it termed as yogam here? It became an yoga because that was treated properly by the psycho practitioner here. So this was the sequence of the picture that we can say. So initially our Arjuna was a mighty warrior. Then he wanted to see the armies, then came here, showed all his physical symptoms that he is having all these conditions. He failed in strength. His mind became confused. And finally, he decided not to fight. And at the coming to the end of the chapter, let's see the analysis of the emotional states of both Arjuna and Lord Krishna. Arjuna, as I just told in the starting of this chapter, he displayed his enthusiasm to fight. He wanted to have a glance at the warriors on both sides. He started to strike the emotional bond when viewing the warriors. And this feeling intensified and made his mind restless and agitated. He started to display physical weakness, felt that he should avoid the war, and started giving personal reasons first. He did not have proper base. Without proper base, he started concluding. After his conclusion, he took on the line of a philosophy. And at the end, he was caught in the quagmire of thoughts, confusion, restlessness, and finally collapsed. So that is the sequence of emotional states of Arjuna. And when we look at Lord Krishna, from the time Arjuna started giving his opinions or giving his statements, he did not react at all. When he told about his physical symptoms, he rightly understood that they were not his physical problems. So giving any tablets to that is not going to help him immediately, because whatever he is saying is not a physical symptom. He understood this is a condition that triggered because of his mental state. So he did not react to Arjuna's emotional words. He did not interrupt his flow of speech, and he remained unmoved in spite of Arjuna's arguments and Arjuna's conclusions. He waited patiently till Arjuna gets over all his emotions. In the next chapter, until few more verses, Arjuna still continues his emotions, and we will see how Krishna further triggers a kind of uses a kind of words which triggers emotions further. And when Arjuna finally surrenders himself to Lord Krishna and asks him what he has to do, that's when he starts preaching him. So when a person is doing the job of a doctor, he should properly identify what is the patient's condition. And that's what Lord Krishna exactly done here. And many of them have the questions, or many of them have the opinions that what Lord Krishna done is wrong or what Lord Krishna done is right. There are a lot of opinions, but Lord Krishna never was bothered about the opinions. From his standpoint of view, he wanted to uplift Arjuna from going below the state to from the human state to animal state. He was coming down. He had to pull Arjuna back to a divine state, and that's what exactly he did by giving him the right kind of knowledge, the right kind of wisdom. When we see Arjuna, he has a very spiritual background, and he was also a very great warrior with a very good personality, goodness and all. he had received many boons from Indra and all. And when you see his past life and read in the mythology, he was quite stable. And at the final moment, what was the cause of the misery? The cause of the misery was the emotions that he underwent. And that's the reason for such state where a person is really having a very good intellectual capability, but yet clouded by emotions. Lord Krishna wanted to bring forth the knowledge for the universal application. And there, at that point of time, he triggered Arjuna intentionally by telling the word Guru, which triggered a profound emotions in Arjuna, and he started to fall with his mental anxieties. And that's the time Krishna created to teach Arjuna the right knowledge. So Lord Krishna's teaching of Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna at that time was to bring him back from animal state to the divine state. The preaching was to perform one's duties without being attached to the results of one's actions, with complete surrender to the Supreme. Lord Krishna was not worried about the mana or avamana that would result because of his act, meaning that even now there are a lot of opinions about Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna was never worried at that point of time whether people would think good about me or think bad about me. The thing that he did was the right thing, without being apprehensive or without being in the thoughts that what others will think for what I am doing. So whatever you do, people give opinions or find mistakes. What are we supposed to do? Are we to look for opinions of the people or do things to get good opinions from the people or do the right things? What are
We
we
have to
supposed to do?
perform our duty. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to do our duty.
Yeah, without the others' opinions.
But are we following that? Do we do that most of the time? Or do we still look for the opinions of others when we do things?
We do
Still
look for
for
approval from
opinion.
others.
So this is a small story, or it could be like, I think many of you might have seen these also, where the man, the wife, and the donkey and the critics. So criticism goes on in spite of whatever you do. If you see the first picture, the two people says, clueless couple, they don't even know how to ride a donkey. Then they both sit on the donkey, and other two people say that what a wicked couple, they have no mercy to the animal. So just because they said that, the wife was right on the donkey and the old man was just walking beside. And he says, stupid man, he should ride because he is the boss of the woman. Okay, then he starts riding. And they say, what a selfish man, he should be kind to his wife. And finally, they carry the donkey with them and they say, what a stupid looking couple carrying the donkey. So if you just go on keeping things for people, opinion, you can never make people satisfied. But when you do a thing, you should have had the clarity of thoughts for why you are doing a particular thing. And if you know that that is the right thing for you, you should never be worried about the opinions of others. So the moral of the story is, you cannot please everybody. Whatever you do, there will be people who criticize you. So just do what you believe is right and don't be distracted by criticisms. So this and all we saw in the first chapter, and the main thing I wanted to reflect upon here is that, so whenever we see a context or whenever we see a situation that happens in our life, look it from multiple angles, meaning that you faced a situation which turned you down. That turned you down because you were affected by that. So you are seeing from your point or your angle. Now what you have to do is you also see it from the other person's, if it's just two persons involved, see it from the other person's point of view about the situation or the event that happened. Again, you stand as a witness. You don't be person A, you don't be person B. You stand at person C and just recap the things that happened between the person A and person B. And as a person C, how would you feel about the situation? When you start looking at a situation from multiple angles when you are down, you will literally know where the problem is exactly. As long as you see only from your angle and don't see it from multiple angles, we will be stuck in that emotional turmoil. And also notice the physical and mental reactions when you are undergoing the stress, and never turn excuses into escapisms. We have to learn to turn excuses into resolutions and actions. This is the main points that we have to reflect on from the first chapter. Do you agree with these points?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Anything unclear in this? Do you have any questions in this? I'm opening another.
No, Abhita, fine. You continue.
I'm just opening another PPT.
But sometimes before we do a work, we get some consent from others, right? Because for example, in office and all, we have some senior persons. I can't do something just like that, right? Obviously, I have to get a consent, or I have to get as approval or something. So that is not opinion, right? You didn't mean that as
See,
opinion. When I started doing it, you are saying it.
This is
Yeah.
after doing the work. See, you did one piece of work. And if someone is talking about the work that you have done, that is what I spoke here.
Okay.
I will be starting the second chapter next week. Today, what I have or what I wanted to share with you is the significance of Bhagavad Gita in terms of our scriptures or in the greatness of the scriptures. So there is something which is called as Prasthana Trayi. And Prasthana means exit and Trayi is 3. So there are 3 things that are called as exits. 3 exits. And why do we need an exit? Or we can have a question like, what is this exits? And these are called as the exits for the knowledge. So when there is an entrance only, there will be an exit. Without an entrance, there cannot be an exit. And this Prasthana Trayi are the 3 exits for our 3 exits of knowledge. And what are we going to exit is when we consider life as an entrance and we have to exit our life, that exit can happen with any of these 3 scriptures or any of the 3 knowledge that are mentioned in this Prasthana Trayi. And first one, we call it as Shrutis, which is the heard knowledge or the Upanishads. And Bhagavad Gita is also the essence of complete Upanishads and the Vedas. And that is one among the Prasthana Trayi, which is called as Smriti Purana, meaning that it is not just for hearing, but it is also for practice. You have to do sadhana, is practice. This Upadeshas, this Shrutis is lot of stories which we hear, take morals and all. And the third one is classified as Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutra, which is actually the rules and regulations or the laws or the ethical books that we have to form to decide good or bad or things. We refer to these Brahma Sutras. They are like the laws, the government laws and all. So such an importance is this Bhagavad Gita, which is considered as an exit or the knowledge or the absolute knowledge that we gain to exit. So when we see the certain vegetables like cucumber, pumpkin and all, normally flower comes first and then the fruit comes, but few of these vegetables, the fruit comes first and you will see a flower. And when will this flower drop off? When the fruit matures itself, becomes big enough, then the flower slowly starts dropping off. In the same way, when we can exit is when we become matured in our intellectual and spiritual capabilities. That will lead us to a proper exit. To develop our intellectual capabilities and spiritual capabilities, we take any of the routes of knowledge, but that knowledge needs to be practiced. Then only it will become your spiritual experience, which will elevate your spiritual consciousness, and we can have a proper exit. And this is a verse from the Gita Dhyanam. Gita Dhyanam is a set of 9 shlokas that is composed before we start any study of Bhagavad Gita. This is chanted. And here it is, these 2 lines mentions the greatness of the nectar or the Bhagavad Gita's thing. So what it explains is, Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Geetamritam Mahat. The Upanishad, we told that Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the Upanishads. It comes under the Upanishads. So Sarvam is every. In all, if you consider all the Upanishads as the cows, Sarvopanishado Gavo. So if you consider all the Upanishads as calf, Dogda Gopala Nandanaha. So Dogda is the milker. Who is the milker here? It is Lord Krishna. And Partho Vatsa. And who is the Vatsa? Vatsa means calf. The calf here is Partha, who is none other than Arjuna. Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta and Dugdam Geetamritam Maghat. And what is the Dugdam? Is the milk that is coming out from that cow. And what is that milk? That milk is considered as the Amritam or the nectar. We all know how significant Amritam is. Why did the gods drink Amritam when it was churned from the milky ocean? What does Amritam give us, or that nectar, the holy nectar which we say gives us, is said to give?
Immortality.
Yes, immortality. So the importance of Gita here is that if you practice Gita in your daily life, it will take you to the state of liberation. When you talk about the state of liberation, in the first level, the state of liberation in the modern terms to the modern transactional levels, it could be the sustenance of happiness and peace throughout our lives. In the second level of the spiritual existence, it will be the one of the reunion with the ultimate truth, we becoming one and we becoming the part of the universe, which is the liberation from the birth and the death. So if you take a pot, inside the pot, we will have some air filled in. And when we ask like, where is the air? You can clearly point out that the air is inside the pot. If the pot breaks, can you show me where that air is? What happens to the air that was inside the pot?
Mixes with the universe.
Yeah, it becomes one. It everywhere. Can we find out that air which was trapped inside the pot? Can we point out anywhere?
No.
No. The same thing is what we also have to happen. So the thing that is said is that, so we also become one with the universe. That is the moksha, what we call as the relief from the cycle of birth and death. Until we don't exhaust our karmic package, we have to be made into different parts at every point of time. And the final pot is where we go to exit is when that pot breaks and no new pot is formed out of it. So that is the thing that the final stage of self-realization leads us to. So Upanishads in the olden days are generally taught between a guru and a disciple. And also the guru has certain see the qualifications of the disciple, and then only he will start giving the knowledge of Upanishad, because there needs to be a pre-qualification or the mental status the disciple has to meet if he has to give. And here also they say Partho Vatsa, so the calf is the Arjuna, and Sudhir Bhokta. Sudhir Bhokta means who can experience, or who can, when we see the cow's part, when does a cow give milk? Can a cow give milk without a calf?
No.
So the cow needs to have calf to give milk. And how does it give? Like the calf will come to the cow, and then the calf will be with an emotional state that it's only the cow's milk. It can feed only on the cow's milk, mother's milk, right? There is no other thing that it can feed. So it touches the cow with such an emotion, and that's when the cow starts giving the milk out. In the same way, when we have to seek the spiritual knowledge, we have to have that emotional seeking. If you come and learn the spirituality with such an emotional thing, to all such spiritual seekers, this milk can be served. Sudhihi Bhokta means everyone. The Bhagavad Gita milk. So after a calf drinks the milk, there will be a lot of milk left over. The calf will not come and drink the complete milk from the cow. And the rest of the milk is used to human beings. It's used in the temples for Abhishekam and for many other things. In the same way, after Arjuna has consumed the direct milk from Lord Krishna, the rest of the milk, in the sense that the same knowledge can be drunk, in the sense can be read and practiced by Sudhihi, by everyone. But what should that everyone possess? The same qualities of Arjuna, which is the spiritual seeking with a complete surrender to the Guru or whoever it is. The Upanishads are generally given between the Guru and the disciple, and it's not a group preaching. Only I explained this. And normally, how will we become one with the Brahman? This is again a very high standard of that absolute knowledge. It is said in the Sanskrit that when you know and practice the knowledge of Brahman, then you become one with the Brahman. But here the person is the Jagat Guru, who is Lord Krishna, who is the Brahman himself, is giving the knowledge. The significance here is that the person here who is the Brahman himself, he is giving the knowledge of Brahma Vidya. And Guru is considered as Brahman in the Sanatana Dharma. So whoever it is, if a person is giving the knowledge, the Guru is considered as Parabrahma. That's why when we say Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma. Here we have clearly defined that any Guru is equivalent to Brahma. And Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. That is the stature we have for Gurus in our Hindu scriptures. And again, asking to the question that why the thing was not taught to Duryodhana, why it was only taught to Arjuna, is because this is a verse that is from the other Gita, which is called the Pandava Gita. And when Lord Krishna comes and tries to talk to Duryodhana and tell him that whatever he is doing is wrong and he can do good and avoid this war, the reply that he gives is that Janami dharmam nachame pravritti, Janami papam nachame nivrittihi, kenapi devena hridistitena yata niyuktosi tata karomi. He says that Janami dharmam. I know what is right, but I am not able to do it. I know what is wrong, but I am not able to stop doing it. Why? He says that there is some mystic power, mysterious power inside his heart, Hridistitena, which is situated in his heart, which is seated in his heart. And that is not making him stop him from doing the bad things. The example that I have brought forward is that if we have such a mindset, if a person has such a mindset of knowing the right, but not being able to stop doing the wrong things, then no one can, any kind of knowledge will not help that person. And for such kind of persons, the main thing is the problem is their own self or their own mind, which has to be changed by themselves alone. We should not have this kind of mindset when we are approaching any kind of learning on the spiritual side. And here the milk is compared to the Amritam, and I told the significance of Amritam that this is the one that gives us immortality in terms of the mythology. And here we know that when we are born, we are going to die for sure. So the mortality here, immortality here doesn't literally speak about the physical body's death that we are having, but it talks about the end of the life or we becoming one with this universe. And in the another popular Sanskrit Subhashita is like the golden words. They had told that Gita, Ganga, Gayatri, Govinda. If you start saying these four things, either chanting or doing this, you will be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. Again, the same thing about the liberation, which is talked in the Gita Dhyanam, there about like Amritam. Here also, there is another quote that is given that if you just keep it in your hearts, any four of these, then you will be free from the cycle of birth and death. And there is another quote by Adi Shankaracharya in the Bhagavad Gita Mahatmyam. He says that Malanir Mochanam Pumsam Jalasnanam Dine Dine Sukrut Gitambasi Snanam Samsara Malanashanam. What does it mean is that every day we take bath to clean our body. We have to do it every day. But he says that, but if one takes bath even once in the sacred Ganges water of Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Gita here is considered as the sacred Ganges, then the dirt of the material life is altogether vanquished. Here, when they say bath, it is again referring to the practical application. When we take this term, it's not just reading Gita, but if you live the way of Gita, then you will be taken away from the dirt of material life altogether, in the sense you will not have this materialistic attachments, or you will have the right kind of mindset to contact the world, which will give you mental peace and happiness, and you will not have stress in your life. So this was all the importance of Gita quoted at many places. And why I wanted to emphasize is that we are learning this, so it will be good when we know the significance of this as well. So do you have any questions in this? No, Abhi.
No, Abhita.
Abhita,
Yeah, no,
what are
Abhita.
the Abhita,
Yeah.
what are the four things? Ganga, Gita, Govinda,
Gayatri mantram.
Mantram.
Ganga
You have
is
to-
taking bath in the water. Gita is the Bhagavad Gita. And Govinda,
Ah.
again, the significance they say is that they say that Govinda is the only name that the Lord earned by himself. The rest of the name was given as a glory to him, to add glory to him. But this Govinda, Govardhana Giridhari, right? So he's for that complete week or 1 or 2 weeks, he will lift the Govardhan mountain in his little finger. And there were
Correct.
many people who did not believe him that they will be able to protect him from the Indra's tricks. And many of them left. But when Lord Krishna started to lift the Govardhan, then again all those people came back and survived under that for 1 or 2 days. So this Govardhana Giridhari is again called as Govinda. So this name has a significance because this is the only name that is quoted to be earned by the Lord himself by his act. The rest of the names they say is the glory given to him. Because of the glories, they gave that name.
Okay. So reading Gita, taking what do we say? Shower in Ganga,
Or
chanting
telling the
Gayatri
Gayatri
mantra,
mantra.
Gayatri mantra, and just uttering the name
Govinda
Govinda.
Nama.
Govinda Namalu. Okay. Okay. This
Yeah,
will
so-
lead. Okay. Got it.
So this is all again citations. That's what. See, I took at many places the significance of Gita is mentioned in our
All are
Hindu scriptures.
G. Okay.
Yeah,
4
the 4
Gs.
Gs. Yeah. So just giving you an idea, there's not that we have to follow each one of these, or it's just what is given in the references and in the things that I came across in my reads for these past years, I had just gathered. So that
Oh.
you will also know opinions from different people. See, this one again is said by different people. It appeals to you or not appeals to you is totally up to you. But these were the
Okay.
opinions given by the great scholars at the point of time they wrote their books.
Okay. Okay, Babita. Thank you.
Yeah.